guess we'll get started here. So again, this is the new data manager session. It's really not specifically targeted to new data managers. Anybody can attend it. I mean, it's great for new data managers if you've never heard it, but if you've heard it before, it's a good review. And particularly this one, I think, because we had that new website update, and I'm having to learn. I had to learn where everything was again, so I had to redo my slides, and so we're going to kind of, as we go through this, we'll do a walkthrough of that too. Let's see if I can control my slides. Let's see. Yes. All right. So what are the learning objectives? So the main learning objectives here is that we are going to identify STS educational resources. We're going to learn a little bit about the data and software specifications. We're going to learn a little bit about the Proc ID chart, and we're going to identify resources within the National Harvest Report. So there's a lot of information here, a lot of information. It's 2 hours, it's packed, and hopefully I'll do my best to not talk too fast, but fast enough to get through everything. All right, so let the games begin. Sometimes this is what it feels like in data collection. You're looking around and you're like, oh my God, there's so much to do here, and how am I ever going to get all this done? And I always tell this story. I'm going to tell this story. Some of you probably heard this before, but this is how I got started in data collection. And I had been a nurse for many years. I had worked in pediatric hearts, adult hearts, all kinds of cardiology, and I had a horse accident, and I after a while decided, after 2 surgeries, I probably shouldn't do this bedside thing much anymore because my arm was numb and stuff like that. So I started looking for an easier job in nursing, and I got hired in the quality department, and they were real excited because I had cardiac experience, and they had just started with the registry. And actually, they had started the registry like 1.5 years before, because that's the reason I went to the hospital, was to help them set up their open heart program and work in the ICU, because they'd never done open hearts and there was hardly anybody with any experience. And so when I went to the quality department, they're like, okay, we're going to put you in charge of the cardiac registry. And I was like, oh, this is great. And they're like, yeah, there's a deadline coming up in 6 months. All you have to do is enter all of these data collection forms in. And there's a stack. I'm sitting down, there's a stack, about as high as my chair on the floor there. And I thought, well, that can't be too hard. I mean, all I got to do is enter them in, right? So I picked the first one up. It had a name on it, had a medical record number, and a date of surgery. That was it. It had nothing else. I thought, well, that's got to be a fluke. So I picked the next one up, same thing, the next one, same. I thought, oh, Lord have mercy, what am I going to do? So I'm telling you, I didn't know anything about a training manual. I knew nothing about any resources. When I looked at that form, it said diabetes. I just figured out whatever I knew what diabetes was. So I just entered that in if the patient had it. So I'm hoping that, and I learned all the resources, but it really took me many months to learn the resources. And how I first learned all the resources was at AQO, because after about working there for 6 to 8 months, they decided they're going to send me to AQO. And then that's when I learned all about the training manual and things like that. So some of you may be in that same situation that I was in. So I like to share that story so that at least you're not alone out there, because it does happen. And you will survive. I did survive. Okay. So what resources we're going to talk about? The website, the webinars, mentorship program, AQO, which I just mentioned, that's our data manager conference once a year, the database newsletter, and regional groups. So as most of you probably know, the website design changed a couple of weeks ago, and it looks quite different than it used to look. There are many ways to get to the resources for the data managers, but this is the way I found is the easiest way. And that's how I'm going to present. It doesn't mean that that is the way that you have to get there. But for me, I found after trying several times, I thought, well, this is the easiest way to do it. So we're going to talk about the website first. So when you pull up sts.org and you go into it, you'll see the tabs at the top for the database, and the research and data tab, if you pull down on it, there's a place specifically for data managers. I always click into that one to begin with, get my data managers. And then the resources for data managers come up. Now, this is a little deceiving because you see it and it says access the database. Well, that's access to IQVIA, okay? Because I pushed that several times when I was first trying to figure out how to get to the resources, how to get to the training manual, and I kept getting to IQVIA. So I just wanted to point that out. So when you first pull it up, that access to database is IQVIA. I think it should be relabeled, but that's just me personally. Okay. Once you scroll down on this form, in this section, you're in the data manager resource section. Once you scroll down, you will see a table of contents, and it has got basically, how to ask a question, contact support, essential forms, how-to videos. You pretty much got everything you need to that we're used to seeing in the old website. It just looks different, but pretty much all the content is still there. Okay. So we're going to kind of go through this a little bit and just talk briefly about each one of these programs. So the Data Manager Mentorship Program. The goal of that program is to pair experienced data managers with those less experienced data managers who would like to have a mentor, who would like to have some help. You can apply to be a mentor or a mentee directly from the website. You just click on apply as a mentor or apply as a mentee. If you have questions about the mentorship program, you can contact Addie Dolan. She's in charge of that. I know now that we have been running short of mentors. So if any of you are on the call that are more experienced, would like to apply to be a mentor, there are mentees waiting for your guidance. So please feel free to do that. Regional groups is the next thing that comes up as you scroll through the table of contents on the data manager resource section. Regional groups are great. Pretty much, there's a regional group pretty much in every place of the country. And what do regional groups do? Well, basically, they provide education, collaboration, kind of networking within a region. So I'm like in the Northwest region, which is a huge region. I mean, it's Alaska and it's Montana and it's Oregon, it's Washington, it's Idaho. So it's a very big region. So we usually just do monthly calls and where we either have guest speakers come and talk to us, or we do presentations ourselves. But there are other groups, regional groups like Michigan, Maryland, Virginia, those in Texas, they actually have like conferences where they will meet in person or have virtual presentations. And I think that's because the people in that area are very close proximity. They're all in Texas or they're all in Michigan, and as opposed to being in the Northwest. So these are really great resources if you want to be involved in a regional group. You can click into the regional database section. It will go over and give you the names of the leaders of the regional groups, so you could reach out to them and ask to join their group. I know that some regional groups aren't as active as others, and some are looking for leaders. So if there's anybody out there that may want to be a regional group leader and you see that there's a vacancy in your region, feel free to step up to the plate for that. It's a great resource, especially if you're new and you just kind of want to learn a little bit more, get to know some people in your region. It's a great resource. The next item that comes up as we're continuing to go through this resources section is the SGS National Database News. This is a bi-monthly newsletter that offers updates about the STS National Database. And there's a separate issue for each of the 4 registries. So there's an adult cardiac, a congenital, thoracic, and intermax. If you are not receiving this email, because it comes via email, then you can click to fill out the form and be added to the mailing list. Lots of really good information in the database news. Carol does a really good job with that. All right, now let's talk about clinical question request form. Basically, these are the frequently asked questions, and this is essentially my mailbox where clinical questions come in. And I'll spend a little bit of time talking about this because it's important to know some of the specifics of how to answer, how to send in a question. So you'll see this on the Data Manager resource as you scroll down. And when you want to submit a request, which is a question, you hit that button. It'll bring you up to a form that looks like this. Now you will notice that there are some stars in red there. And these are required items, right? Okay. I really like if you put your phone number in. Some people don't like to give me their phone number, but what happens is that sometimes every once in a while there'll be somebody that sends me a question. I'll answer them, I send it back, and the email gets sent back to me. I can't deliver that email. So I try to, sometimes I like, okay, let me check the email, make sure I've got it entered right and all this stuff. And sometimes if they sent me a question before, I can figure out, oh, there was a mistake in this email address and I can fix it. But if it's somebody who's never sent me a question, and so I don't have any a record of them ever sending me a question before, I can't search for an older email or a different email to verify what that email is that they entered in this form, then I have no way of answering their question unless they've given me their phone number. And so that's why I like the phone number, because sometimes I will have to call and say, you know, I've been trying to answer your question, but I can't do it because it keeps getting sent back to me. So it's important for me to have your phone number. I won't call you unless I need to. And the other important thing here is the database version. It's a drop down, and you can select which version you're asking the question about. That's important for me to know because, as you all know, sometimes data definitions were different in different versions. So I need to make sure that I'm answering the question in the right version, the right answer. This is real important down here, sequence numbers. And this is really helpful for me too. I know sometimes you don't have a sequence number, like it's just a case inclusion question or something, and you guys put like 4 zeros or something in there. And I get that because there's not a sequence number. But if you're asking a specific question about a specific sequence number, please put it in there, because sometimes I will read a question and I think that you're asking me a question about a certain a specific sequence number. But you may be asking a question about a totally different one. I got a question the other day about a transfer, and I thought they were asking a transfer to another acute care hospital question. What they were asking me actually was admit source and how it had to deal with transfer. So it's important to put that. The other thing is you only put numbers and letters in here. If you put anything else besides a number or a letter, like you put a comma, sometimes people do that, it will not send your FAQ to me. It won't go through. So you only put numbers and letters here. Okay. The only other thing I want to say about the FAQ is that I'm usually pretty good about getting answers back to you within a week, unless I have to review it with leadership or the surgeons. If you send me something and you don't hear anything from me in over a week, please send it to me again, because maybe it didn't get to me, or maybe I accidentally put it somewhere where it shouldn't have been, or, so just kind of keep that in mind, because usually I'm pretty good about at least making contact with you. The mailbox is getting busier and busier, so I'm getting a little further behind than I normally have been, but I think probably you would have at least heard something from me within a week. And if you haven't, let me know. Okay. As we scroll down further on this data manager resource, we see the next thing is contact and support. Now, this is besides the FAQ. We've already talked about the clinical contact and support. That's basically me. Now we're going to talk about the help desk. So this is the STS National Help Desk link here. You would click into this and you could ask them a question. The help desk, as you know, is now managing all of the questions that you used to send to IQVIA first line about your data quality reports and your analysis and things like that. And then the help desk is kind of fielding those. The ones they answer. The ones that they feel are clinical come to me. The ones that need to go to IQVIA, they move them forward. So that's kind of the role of the help desk now. And then we also have the STS National Database staff team. This is a different website that is more of like questions for invoicing or contract questions, or just general type of database questions. And then we also have a link for STS public reporting questions. So, and as you can see, they actually have a nice hyperlink right here in brown where you can actually contact the help desk, make it a little easier, because probably me and the help desk get a lot of questions these days, so it's just easier to have it laid out like that. Okay. All right. As we scroll down, you're going to see that you have your essential forms and your resources. So as you look at this, you've got your participant contact forms, your Schedule A's, your Schedule B's. This is also where there's information about database software and vendors. This is where the audit information lies now. I know that Emily's going to be sending out audit letters soon. Lord, I hope nobody who's a new data manager gets that letter, because it's really scary to have to get that on top of just trying to learn how to do things in the database. But if you do get the letter, you would come under Essential Forms and Resources, click on Database Audits, and it will open up and give you information about the audits. And so this is kind of a nice little resource, and I like how it's laid out. It's pretty easy to find things the way it's laid out here. All right. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the audit. So just add a little bit more here onto it. So if you were to click into the audit link, you would see that there's specific instructions for adult cardiac and general and congenital intermax and pediamax. And it has an instructional video. It also, if you click more into it, talks about the audit fields that were done last year. So it gives you a pretty good information about the audit and the process. Of course, if you have any specific questions, Emily Conrad is in charge of the audits, and so you could easily contact Emily if you have additional questions. So as we scroll down further in this data manager resources, the next thing that you come to are these how-to videos. So they've highlighted a couple, like the risk adjusted dashboard report. That's kind of a how to read that, how to work with that video. And then you'll see that they have the IQVIA registry dashboard navigation training how-to video and the IQVIA uploader and DQR how-to video. So those are very helpful videos. The other thing that you will see is the STS National Database YouTube channel. Right here, okay? This is got wonderful information on it, and if you'll see over here, if you click into the channel, if you just want to see adult cardiac webinars that have been presented, just click on the playlist, and you can see the scroll through all the adult cardiac webinars. So I like how it's divided here. It makes it a lot easier to find things. I did want to point out, just for those of you who were used to the old website and had used it for a long time, that the anatomical design diagrams that we used to have sort of in the same section for have been removed from the website. Now, I discovered this as I was making these slides. And what we're going to be doing in July is I'm going to be adding hyperlinks to these diagrams so that you'll be able to access the diagrams. So that will be coming. I kind of realized that all of this after the June training manual went out. So, and this is a new development, new decision where we're going to put them. So just FYI, in case you're looking for that, it will be coming to the training manual. All right, now we're going to get into the meat, more of the meat. Actually accessing the adult cardiac surgery database. And it's this right here, access the data collection resources right here. And that's the button that you push to get into the training manual and your Proc ID and all of that other good stuff that you need to find on a daily basis. But before we get there, you'll see that underneath here we have some sample data analysis reports. We've got the adult cardiac multiplier tables, and we have harvest deadlines. Okay, before I'll mention briefly about multiplier tables, just in case you want to. Let me go back up to that. I'll mention briefly about this multiplier tables. I couldn't remember if I made a slide about that or not, or if I just added it into this one. So if you are interested in using STS risk adjustment locally at your particular site, there's a calculation in the the overview of the data analysis report, which we will talk about later in this call. But these are the multiplier tables that you will use in your calculation. And this is where they live now. For those of you ambitious ones who do that. So, all right. Moving on to harvest deadlines. So we, as long as I worked with STS, we've always called it a harvest. It's really a submission deadlines for those of you who aren't used to that terminology. So when we say harvest deadline, that means submission deadline. They're kind of they go together there. So if you look here, you see that there are 4 harvest periods a year. 2 of them are stars. So as you can see, harvest 1 is a star rating and harvest 3 is a star rating. It will tell you here what harvest it is, when the window closes, when's your opt-out date, what procedures are included through, okay? So like harvest 1 should have had your, procedures through 12/31/22. When they expect the report to be posted, and any specific comments such as star rating. Now, it's really important to remember that data submission is open and continuous for the harvest. So you can submit every week if you like. It's up to you. I actually suggest that you submit early and often. And try not to wait till the last minute to submit, because if you run into issues, it's a lot harder to get them resolved at the very last minute than it is if you run into that issue earlier in the quarter. I know that just from my own personal experience, in the mailbox is extremely busy, like the last week before harvest, last week and a half. And, I do the best I can to get, and the help desk too, just the best we can to get all of the harvest stuff answered. But sometimes there's issues that got to be escalated up a little higher. So please submit early, submit often. The other thing that's really important to remember is submission close occurs at 11:59 p.m. Eastern time, okay? So if you're like me, you live in the Pacific time zone, this is really important to remember because 11:59 is only 8:59 at my time. So, and don't wait till the last minute. Don't wait till 11:55 p.m. Eastern time to submit, because your file may take longer than 4 minutes to process. And if you submit very, very late and the file is not completely processed, it won't go through. You won't have a submitted file. So please be aware of the time. And again, submit often and submit early. Just to highlight here again, IQVIA has some wonderful resources for how to upload your harvest and how to do your DQR review. And Carol is really good about every time there's a harvest coming up. It seems like we do a webinar, one of the monthly webinars. We spend time focusing on cleanup and looking at the DQR. And so if you want more information about this, go onto the YouTube channel. And Carol's probably done, I don't know how many she's done. She's done a lot of them over the years to help with just cleaning up and getting ready for harvest.
Yeah, I think our most recent one was in early May, I think,
Yes.
for the May 19th deadline.
Yeah. So lots of good resources out there on the YouTube site for you guys. Okay, on here. I can't see what time it is, so I hope I'm not moving too slow. Okay, so
It's you've been on for an hour, for a half hour. You have an hour and a half left.
okay, good. Doing good then. All right, thanks. So anyway, as we move down, we will see the ACSDS webinars. This looks a little different than it used to, but it's still under the data manager resources. And I wanted to point this out before we get right into where the training manual is. We'll go back to that. But as we slide down further, here's your webinar. So you can see that here was the one we had yesterday, what the time is, how to join it. Here's your most recent ones. Here's your slides, and here's your past ones, which basically take you to that YouTube channel where you can find out. And we have webinars twice a month. We're doing generally one educational webinar and one QI project webinar a month. And it's on the first and third Wednesdays, generally speaking, that we have these webinars at 2 p.m. Central Time, which is 12 p.m. Pacific, which is 3 p.m. Eastern, and 1 p.m. Mountain. I'm gotten really good at all these different time zones.
Yeah, you're doing good, Melinda, with that. Very impressive.
So I think this is the last thing I want to talk to you before we actually get into the training manual section a little bit more. So the advances in quality and outcomes, a data manager's call. Now this is this was a little harder to find on the website. This is not in the data manager resource section. It's in the education section. So when you open it up and you go to the national database, the top tab that says education, if you can see the calendar events, click into that and you'll be able to find it posted on the calendar. And you can see that this one is a virtual conference. Last year we were in person. This year we're virtual. Next year we're in person again. It's September the 26th through the 29th. I think adult is the 28th, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's right. It's Thursday.
Okay, very good. Registration has opened, and I believe abstract registration is open too. So we would encourage you to register for the event. It's a great educational opportunity. It's packed full of really, really good information, and we do have Q&A after each session. Surgeons are available to interact with, which is great. You know, get to do that very often. It's also an excellent networking opportunity, especially if we're in person, when you get to meet people and put faces with names and things like that. So we also have, after the conference, last year we started a hot topic AQO, like hot topic review afterwards, just to kind of, because sometimes we get questions at AQO that we really can't answer. And we have to take them back and talk about it. And so having the hot topic webinar actually gives us the opportunity to get the answers to some of the questions that we couldn't answer, and then provide them to the participants that were there, plus answer additional questions that people may have, and kind of just give a general view of the presentation that was done. I think it went really well last year. It was really well received. So I know we're going to do it again this year. I think it's going to be in December. Carol mentioned yesterday.
Yes,
and okay. All right. So now let's get into the meat of it. Where is the training manual? Okay. So again, we're under data manager resources. Scroll all the way it's about halfway down, I guess. It's kind of a long scroll. And it says Adult Cardiac Surgery Database. And it says access the data collection resources. This is the one that takes you to the training and all of your other resources. It does require a login. So when you push on that, it's going to say login required. You can, once you get logged in, it will remember you. You can click the little box and say, remember me, and it remembers you for basically till you sign out, I believe, several times. It remembers me quite a long time. But anyway, so then once you click into that, here's what you see. It looks a little different than it used to look, but the information is there. Just looks different. So here's version 4.2. Here's your training manual. Here's your FAQ summary. And as you can see, you would just scroll down and you would find other types of data collection forms here. We're gonna start talking about the training manual as we move on. So the training manual, just so you know, a training manual has some rhyme and reason to it. It has bookmarks in it, which is great. I mean, you can open it up, and every month I have to bookmark these things, which is challenging, but it's job security for me. So anyway, you get new bookmarks every month. So here's your update for June. Here's your risk factors. There's your pre-op labs. Da 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 da. This training manual can also be searched with the Control F function. I do that all the time. So let's say I'm looking for Ross procedure. Okay, what's in this training manual about the Ross procedure? I Control F and I type in Ross procedure, and it'll basically show me how many times that particular verbiage is in the training manual, and then it'll take me to it. It's just like a sequence number. If you want to find sequence 2629, just Control F, put that in, and it'll take you to every place that 2629 is mentioned in the training manual. To me, that's the best and easiest way between the table of contents bookmark section and the Control F word search function. It's the best way to navigate the training manual in a fast, efficient way. The training manual is updated once a month. That's important to know. And we do have the FAQ summary, the running summary. So you can easily identify. Let me go back up and show you that really quick. So you'll see here's the training manual itself, but here's the running summary. So you can click on this and quickly identify any of the new updates, as opposed to having to go through the training manual to identify the updates. I've made this summary form for you, so it's easy to identify the updates. And then when you get into your training manual, you can also easily see that there are bookmarks for the updates too. So it is updated once a month. Usually comes out the first of the week of the month, first week of the month. A couple things about color coding. So FAQs, so any update, if it's a brand new update, it is put out in Carol's red. This is Carol's red. I've actually become very fond of it, but when we first started this.
Go on, Melinda, go on. Tell them about the red.
When we first started this, I wanted the other red, Carol wanted this red. I'm like, okay, I'm just go with Carol's red. So kind of a little ongoing joke, but I actually really like the red now. So
the other red is like the angry, bright red. Rawr. This is like the calm, hi, I'm just an update, want to let you know what's going on.
Yeah.
Red,
so,
not the angry red.
So this is Carol's red, but I have become to like it. So anyway.
We actually almost got in a fight over it, but it's all good.
So anyway, this is a brand new updates are in red. Okay. Even if and you'll see most of the time I'm doing is updates now instead of FAQs. In the old days, we used to do FAQs all the time. And the new ones would be in red. And as soon as they were, the next month would come, we'd make them black. So you'll still see some scattered FAQs. I don't do them that much anymore. And I kind of have an ulterior motive for not doing them. It's just easier when I go to write the training manual again for the new upgrade to not have all those FAQs in the training manual, because then you have to like figure out how you're going to incorporate them into the new training manual. So it's just a little easier to do it up front as opposed to putting it in an FAQ format. So a lot of updates. Once the update has passed, so let's say this update, you can see this is in August 2021. It's an old update. It's in green. And you'll see the brand new update, June of 2022, was in red. Okay. Let's talk about data collection forms. I think this is important for those of you who are super new, especially to know that there's two data collection forms. There's the non-annotated one, and there's an annotated. And basically, the difference is that the annotated has the short name and the sequence number right there. Okay, so I always use an annotated data collection form because, as I said, I use Control F all the time to search documents. So I want to know what the sequence number is, or I want to know what the short name is. And this form just gives me personally so much more information than the other form that doesn't have the numbers on it. As far as being useful when I'm searching training manuals. The other thing that the data collection forms have on them are, you will see these two little red stars up here. That indicates a risk variable. So like this here, Latino or Spanish ethnicity. It's got two little stars beside it. That means it's a risk variable. If it's an NQF metric, you will see two little crosses right there. Throughout you'll see them in the data collection form. Okay. The next thing, after we see the training manual and the data collection forms, we're going to see surgeon worksheets. They're sort of in a different, they're about in the same location. They look a little different, but these are worksheets to assist with your data collection that you can have your surgeons fill out. There are also Word versions. So like, let's say you don't particularly like all the things that are on, or it's too busy for the surgeon, he wants it to be shorter. You can actually use the Word version and alter the worksheet to suit needs of your site. If you're using these worksheets, a couple important things to know. If the information that you're getting off of this worksheet needs to be available to it needs to be, trying to say, it needs to be in the medical record too, basically. I mean, so, or because an auditor might see something that you've gotten from this worksheet, and it's nowhere, anywhere. And she's going to want, he might wonder, well, where did you get that information at? So just make sure that if you're using these worksheets actively, you've got them somehow incorporated, provided for the auditors, available. The surgeon has signed them, so we'll know that it's his work or her work. I think it's really great if the surgeon does the worksheets. I know that a lot of surgeons don't do these worksheets, but for those sites those sites that have surgeons that do it, I know it's great for them. Okay, so we're going to scroll down a little further and talk about some additional resources. Data specifications, software specifications. You're going to see the Proc ID chart, the risk model chart. We're going to go through most of these briefly, and we're going to start with the software specifications first because it just kind of flows easier, and then we'll go to data specs. So we're going to talk a little bit about most of these as we go through the slide presentation here, to at least so that you'll understand what they are and what they're used for. Okay, so let's talk about the software specifications. Now, it's a long document. It's got lots of information in it. I didn't know what a software specification was probably for 5 years before, when I was a data manager. Probably took me that long probably to even know what it was and what it had in it, much less what it had in it. So I'm going to just point out some really, I think, important things that are in the software specification. And then at your convenience, you can read it through your leisure time. So page 4 is really important because it has the dates of all the versions. So you can see that version 4.2 started in July 1st, 2020, and it's the current for the current date. But you can see when 2.9 started and stopped, 2.8 started and stopped. And this is important if you are have backlog. Let's say that you've got some 2.9 cases that need to be entered. Well, you need to be able to know when did 2.9 start and when did 2.9 end. So this is a good resource to know the dates of the versions. Page 6 on the software specification page talks about how to read a data spec. And we're going to go, next we'll go through the data specs after we finish the software specs. But it basically talks about the format. It talks about what an integer is. Well, I'm glad it tells me what it is, because there's no way that I would remember that from grammar school at my age. So an integer basically is a numeric value with no decimal points. And then it tells you what a real number is. Well, that's a value with 1 decimal point. And then it tells you what a text value is. Basically means that it can contain any alphanumeric characters. So it tells you what a data source is. So it kind of tells you how to read your data specs, basically, in some of these terms that you may or may not be familiar with. So it's a great resource. Page 11 is another really good resource. It talks about the record ID number, which is a unique numerical value that identifies the record in the database. It kind of looks like this, V01 da 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 da. It always kind of starts with this V01, and you will see that in your data quality reports. You'll probably see that in your some of your analysis reports. You'll see record IDs, you'll see patient IDs, you'll see different kinds of IDs. This record ID is one that is assigned to the patient by the database. Once it's attached to a specific record, the value can never be changed, nor can it be reused if the record is deleted. So it's just tells you what the record ID is so that you understand what it is. Page 14, this one's important because I get lots of questions about what data can we input from our medical record system into the STS database. Well, I'll tell you, you can't do a whole lot. And the reason that you can't do a lot is because of the importance of data managers, you know, having their eyes on the data, making sure it's accurate data, the limitations of informatics on writing the correct codes, because our data definitions and training manual is quite involved. So page 14 will tell you what you can import. Basically, the ADT tool is, and that's really your admission discharge tool. But, you know, you can do last names, you can do first names, you can do dates of birth, patient's age. This page 14 will tell you exactly what you can import and what can and what you can't import. Okay. Page 16 is another important page. Talks about parent-child relationships. So if you don't know what a parent field is or a child field, because you're going to kind of need to know that when you read your data specs, this will tell you. This will tell you, you know, what the parent is, and what a child field is. Page 26 talks about calculations. This one in specific has the mailed calculations. Sometimes I get questions, I'm not getting a mailed score for this patient. Well, as you know, the mailed score is a calculated score, but in order to calculate it, you have to have entered your INR, your total bili, and your creatinine. If you missed one of those values, then you're not going to get a mailed score. So page 26 will tell you how that score is calculated. And so if you're not getting a score, it's probably because you got a missing total bili or an INR or a creatinine, and it's not able to be calculated. Page 27 talks about calculation of the post-op, total post-op initial vent hours. So it tells you how these things are calculated. So if you have questions about how this number is calculated, the software specs is where you come to find out these calculations. 29, this is really, page 29 is real important. You can see, like, for example, this is antibiotic discontinuation. You can see that it didn't even start, this field didn't even start to version 2.61, and its sequence number was 1347 in 2.61, but now in 4.2 it's 2290. So what does that tell you about the database? Woo, it's really grown. Go from 1347, now it's all the way to 2290. So you can see how sequence numbers will change, can change over versions, but short names don't change. Okay. And so this is a nice table if you're just wondering, especially if you wanted to query something and like, well, when did they even start, you know, collecting this particular field? You can, this is a kind of quick reference to see when it was started. Okay. All right, now we're going to briefly move on to the data specification, which is another resource. We're going to look and see how it looks and how we're going to read it. And then you'll, after I do this, you'll understand why I did the software specs first, so we knew what integers and real numbers are. So when you look at the data specifications, it'll give you a sequence number. So this is sequence number 375. It tells you it's a harvest field, it's a core field. Here is your long name. Here is your short name. Here's the section that it's in. Okay. Here's the table that it's in. Here is your definition. Now, this is the definition, but remember in the training manual, below the definition, there's an intent clarification section. So just don't read the definition, because sometimes And the reason I say that is because sometimes the definition isn't as clear as it should be. And the intent clarification section elaborates on this one-line definition and gives you much more information. So always make sure when you're in your training manual that you're looking at the definition and the intent clarification also. The other thing to know about definitions while we're here is that we can't change the definition once the version comes out. So the only place that we can clarify the definition or add to the definitions is in the intent clarification section. So that's why it's so important to read that section and just not look at the definition. Okay, it tells you what the data source is here. So that's user, meaning you're going to be entering this in. It tells you your format, which is text. Okay, and this is a text categorical values specified by STS. So, oops, sorry about that. I hit the wrong button. I was trying to point my cursor and that didn't work. Okay, let's see. Let me go back to where I was. There we go. Again, here's your format. And remember, text is a value that can contain any alphanumeric numbers versus an integer versus real. And here's your harvest code. So harvest code 1 is yes, harvest code 2 is no, harvest code 3 is unknown. As we go further into the data specs, we'll look at another one here for some other examples. So this is INR. So you've got your long name, your short name, which factor section it's in. You got your definition, you got your sequence number, and you can see the format here is real. Okay. So remember, real numbers are numeric values with at least one decimal point. Okay. Now, when you see a data specification such as this that has numbers in it, you're gonna see a range. You're gonna see a low value, a high value, a usual low, and a usual high. So let's talk about what that means, because I get lots of questions about that. So let's talk about the usual first. So the usual range, it gives you a low number. So usually the low is 0.9. Usual range high is 1.3. Okay, so if you enter 1.4, your vendor is going to have a warning that says, that's not in the usual range. Because your usual range is 0.9 to 1.3. Now, the vendor has to set that up, right? Because this is how the data specs are set up. So sometimes that's a pain in the butt. You're like, well, why am I getting this message? That's what the patient's INR is. Well, you're getting the message because of these data specs, okay? So if it's 1.4 and you see this is not in the normal range, the usual normal range, and you check it and that's what the patient's was, you just hit enter and just accept it and move on. No problems, just move on. Now, the other value over here you're going to see is the low value and the high value. So the low value is 0.5. The high value is 30. So if by chance you tried to enter an INR of 0.4, you're going to get a different warning because these are, I like to call these are your max acceptable low, your max acceptable high. That's kind of how I wrap my brain around it. So, and as you can see on the scale, it's in the red, and you can't enter in the red. So if it's lower than 0.5, it's not going to let you enter. You're going to get a critical error or a hard stop error. I can't remember exactly what all vendors call it, but it's a different warning. It's a different warning. It's clearly a different warning. And I think it's called a red error or a critical error. It just depends on what your vendor is. So how do you fix that? The patient's INR is actually 0.4, but you cannot enter. You physically, it will not let you enter it. So you just put 0.5 in. Just put the lowest you can in that situation. The same thing happens over here. If you have an INR of 31, and Lord help that patient if you have an INR of 31, it's pretty bad off. But if you try to enter 31, it won't let you enter. So the only thing you can enter here is 30. So you put the 30 in. And see this green area here, these are the usual ranges. So, but you can enter anything in between the low and the high. Okay, that's all acceptable to be entered in. If you enter something outside the green, you're going to get that little, oh, are you sure you want to enter that in message? And you just look at it and say, yeah, I do, and move on. If you try to enter anything in the red section, you're going to get a critical error. It's not going to let you do it. You can't move on. Just enter the lowest value you can or the highest value you can, depending on which end you're trying to enter into. Okay, parent-child relationships in the data specs. Here's a good example. So you have diabetes, yes, no, or unknown. And it says if yes. Okay, so this is a perfect key here that diabetes is the parent. Okay, and if you look down here in the data specifications for diabetes control, it will tell you that diabetes is the parent. Okay, so on your data collection tool, this is a real key. If yes, then you answer these questions. If you say yes to diabetes, meaning it's the parent field, it's gonna you're gonna have to answer the diabetes control. If you say no or unknown, you're not even going to be able to get over here to answer these questions because these are child fields. So in a child field like this, on your data specs, it will always tell you what the parent long name is. So you will know what's controlling opening this field, and you'll know what the parent is to that. So I wanted to point that out. Okay. All right. I'm going to have a little glass of water before we start the Proc ID chart. Now, I'm going to give you a little bit of information. Carol has done some webinars, and so have I on this in the past, which would be on the playlist. It is it's a little difficult to learn how to read the Proc ID chart. But if you practice with it, you'll get better at it. And the other important thing that you need to know is you got to have that annotated data collection form with the sequence numbers on it to read this chart. You really do. It's very helpful because you're going to want to know your sequence numbers when you're looking at this chart. I'm going to give you my tips on how to read this. Okay. So when you pull this up, this is what it looks like. It's busy, man. I'm telling you, look at it. But we're going to try to break it down. So over here, you have the sequence number and the variable. Okay. So this is OpCap 2120. Over here, you have your analyzed. Oh, let me go back first. I'm sorry. Go back up for just a minute. These are the analyzed cases. I meant to say that. Isolated. So these are the cases right here that are on the Proc ID chart. So these are your analyzed cases. So isolated CAB, isolated ABR, isolated MVR, AV CAB, MV CAB, AV, MV, MV repair, MB repair cab. So these are the analyzed cases, and those are the cases that will be on the Proc ID chart. Sorry, I got to mention that. So as you can see, here's your isolated cab, Proc ID 1, isolated ABR, Proc ID 2, isolated MBR, Proc 3, and it kind of goes on. So the first several pages of this is part 1, and that's Proc ID 1 through 4. So you can see, we'll focus here on the isolated cab, that this is all isolated cab going up and down. Okay. These gray lines, just ignore them. That is computer lingo, and it confuses me. So I just don't even pay attention to it, because it's really, it's computer lingo. So just focus on the white lines, okay? Focus on the white lines. All right. So, for example, let's look here. So you have an isolated cab, and you will see here sequence 6515, other cardiac congenital procedure. Okay. So if you code 6515 as missing, PFO, primary closure, anomalous origin of a coronary artery from the pulmonary or from the aorta, if you code any of those 4 things, the isolated cab stays isolated. That's what that means. Okay. Let's look at another one. Let's look at the isolated valve. Same thing for the 6515. That's why it's important to have your annotated data collection form. So if you're coding 6515 in an isolated valve, if you code it as missing or PFO, primary closure, your valve will stay isolated. Okay, so you kind of getting the hang of it a little bit. We'll go to the next page. So you're going to see that as we scroll down through this Proc ID chart, that some of the charts, like look at here, this is VAD. Well, here's other cardiac sequence 4054. That affects all 4 of those categories that we were looking at. And that's the other thing, is you scroll down, the categories don't scroll down with you. You just kind of have to remember that this is the isolated cab, this is the ABR. So, and if it's like this all the way across, it affects all of those 4 that were here before. We can't, for some reason, we can't get this to format to come down to the second page. So it is kind of, so like if you're just focusing on a cab, remember that's column number 2 here. Okay, so as you would go down, you would be looking in column 2 right here for a cab. So as we look here at sequence 4054, that's an LV aneurysm repair. If you code it as no or missing, then your cabbage or your ABR or any one of those 4 that we're looking at stays isolated. If here's an aortic procedure, 2123. So if you code 2123 with your cabbage, and you code it no, yes, unplanned due to surgical complication, or missing, then the cabbage stays isolated. Okay. It's kind of, you have to almost wrap your head around how to read this, but basically it's saying, hey, if I code 212030 as no, that's not going to affect my isolation. If I code it as yes, unplanned to surgical complication, that's not going to affect my isolation. And if I leave it missing, it's not going to affect it. Okay. The same thing down here for AFib lesions, 4191. That's why you need your annotated. You need to have your sequence numbers, because when I search the Proc ID, again, I'm doing Control F and I'm looking for the sequence number. So if you code 4191, which is your lesion location, as epicardial, you will see that your cabbage and your AVR, which is column number 3 over here, remain isolated. If you code it as none, they remain isolated. Missing, remain isolated. This is the MVR category. If I'm not mistaken, let me just make sure. All right, yeah, this is your MVR. Notice what it says here about AFib lesion location, not used in this calculation. So that means if you do a maze or a pulmonary vein isolation, or whether you do intracardiac lesions or epicardiac lesion, it doesn't matter if you're doing a mitral procedure. It's not going to affect case isolation at all. That's what that means, because it's not used in the calculation for the mitral valve. I get a lot of questions about that. Why is it used in these other ones but not this mitral valve one? Because you're already in the left atrium when you're doing a mitral valve. So going in there to do an intracardiac lesion is not really going to affect any risk to the surgery at all, because you're already in the atrium doing your mitral valve. That's why it's not used. So you will see that this got some green highlighting on it. These are changes that were between version 2.9 and 4.2. Let's see what else we can talk about here. I think we got one more we can go on to, but it is a little hard to read it, but once you get used to it, you'll get the hang of it. So let's just kind of go over this again. This is cardiac tumor. So you've got a cardiac tumor, sequence 4115. You're going to code that. You want to know how that's going to affect my case. If you code it as no or missing, it stays isolated. Okay, that's what this means. Ignore the gray lines. We've already talked about that. Oh, sorry. That's me trying to scroll on the page, and that's not working, isn't it? So basically, no. This means if you code no to the field, then the procedure will stay isolated. Missing, this means if you leave this field missing, then the procedure will stay isolated. We will do a little test on the next one, kind of go over a review. So, patient has a cabbage with an epicardial AFib pulmonary vein isolation, performed in sequence 4191. Will this procedure be classified as an isolated CAB? And I went ahead and made my own little headings just for demonstration purposes here. But as you can see, if you're in the isolated CAB category, you look at sequence 4191. If you code epicardial, which is what you're going to code, because that was what was done, that does not affect your case isolation at all. So an epicardial pulmonary vein isolation the cabbage will remain isolated. Okay. All right, we'll move on. I know that's not a lot on the Proc ID. Again, I would need, we would need a whole presentation on that. It's just to kind of give you an idea how to read it. There's a lot of stuff in this particular presentation. And I can't spend too much time on it. We'd have to do that. And like I said, Carol's done that in the past on webinars. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about some other resources as we go through this. We have the risk model variable chart. This is really important because it's going to show you what variable is in each risk model. And the purpose of risk adjustment is to allow the STS database participants to compare their performance with other participants. So by accounting for and controlling the risk factors, you sort of like are leveling the playing field as best possible. So it's really important to know what are the risk variables in each model. And when you open up this chart, and we're just going to kind of go through the look at the cabbage here. And you'll see that here's the model, right? Here's the operative mortality method, stroke, the renal failure, prolonged event. It kind of goes across to which metric you're looking at here. And these little X's will tell you if this particular field is in the risk model. So if you see age is in all the risk models for each one of those metrics. So is gender. So is race. But probably something you didn't know is insurance is in there too. So it's important that you enter your insurance into the database. I've worked with sites before that just don't enter their insurance information. They don't think it's necessary, but it is necessary. It goes into the risk model, and you'll see it's in every one of them. So it's important. You can see a lot of the stuff's pretty intuitive: height, weight, diabetes, lab values. I think a lot of sites use this chart for documentation improvement. So if you know what's in the risk model, and you know that your surgeons and your providers aren't documenting this well, you can work with them to improve that documentation because it is in the risk model. We need to get it in there. For example, chronic lung disease, you can see is pretty much in all of them except for re-op. And some sites don't even do bedside PFTs. They don't do anything, and it's kind of an important factor because it's in all the models to be able to determine the severity of that chronic lung disease. I think would be really helpful to improve your risk scores. Alcohol is in every one of them, and sometimes people don't document that very well, or leave it blank, or don't address it very well, and data managers have to say they don't know how much the patient drinks. So that's, I think, a really good, knowing that that's in the risk model perhaps could drive you to have better documentation and work with your clinicians to do that. Some of these other ones are pretty intuitive, but as you can see, alcohol kind of surprised me. Oh yeah, there it is. Oh, people need to document that better. New York Heart Association class, sequence 915 is in every one of them. Hardly anybody documents that. I think I'm starting to see it more and more. It's important that you work with your providers to get them to document this. It's in each one of the models. Insufficiency. I had a site one time that I worked with, and they just didn't document any insufficiency of their aortic, mitral, or tricuspid valves. They didn't think it was important, but as you can see, it is important. It's in a lot of these risk models. Okay, so it is important to document it. So just being aware of what's in the risk model, what the variables are, will help you to focus on improvement areas. In addition, if you're being audited, just FYI, the audit, mainly focuses on risk variables because we want to make sure that the risk variables are being accurately coded. So again, it's important to know what's in the risk model, what variables are in it for various reasons. The other thing I want to talk about just briefly before we move on to another resource is the mechanical cardiac assist devices. And the reason I'm pointing this out is I get tons of questions about this in my mailbox. So the note that mechanical cardiac assist devices are in the risk model. Now, they aren't in the Proc ID chart, okay? So they do not affect case isolation at all. They affect risk. So if you put in a balloon pump or an Impella or ECMO or any other type of temporary assist device, it will not affect case isolation. It affects the risk model. And it affects the risk model with respect to timing. Okay, so like, when did you put it in? So if you put it in pre-op and you're going into the OR on ECMO or into the OR with a balloon pump or into the OR with an Impella, your risk is going to be higher than a patient that is not going into the OR with those devices in place. As if you've been working with the registry for a little bit of time, you will know that if the patient is entering the OR on ECMO for a cardiac procedure, so you have say a CABG that's going to the OR for a patient's going to the OR for a CABG and he's on ECMO, you'll notice that there's special instructions in the training manual to code the case as emergent salvage and to code it as resuscitation. The reason that we do that is because ECMO does not affect procedure ID. It affects risk. So by coding emergent salvage and coding resuscitation on these patients that are on ECMO, that are having a cardiac procedure, that will elevate their risk. Okay, so I did want to point those things out. The only other thing that I want to say before we move on is that an Impella of any sort, I don't care if it's open, catheter base, version 5, transaxillary, whatever, any sort, is coded as a temporary assist device. It is not coded as a VAD for the STS training manual. Okay, so keep that in mind. All right, I'll get off my soapbox and move on to something else. I actually have a question here. Where can we find the risk model? Okay, so all of these things are here. Let me just scroll back up. Just scroll back up just a little bit. All of these things that I'm talking about now are in this section. Okay, so to get there, you go to Data Manager Resources, access the data collection, sign in with your STS login, not your IQVIA login. This is a different one. Once you sign in, it'll show you this. And as you scroll down this particular part of the website. That's what we're going through now. So that's where your risk model is. That's where your Proc ID, your software specs, your case inclusion guideline, all the stuff we're talking about is in this section. Okay. I think that answers a couple questions up there. Let's get back to where we were. Sorry for all the scrolling. Hope I'm not making you dizzy. Okay. All right. So let's talk about a few more resources that are in that same area that I just pointed out. So the other one is the congenital diagnosis and procedure list. I use this if I have if I got a congenital procedure that I'm being done that's not captured somewhere else in the database. I mean, we have a few spots to capture some congenital procedures in the database under other cardiac other. But let's say we're doing an anomalous cardiac artery unroofing. I see that all the time now. There's a lot of those going on. So if I'm doing that, I would come in here to get my code, my diagnosis. And again, I do my control F and I put the word anomalous in and see what comes up. And that'll help you find the procedure and the category, the diagnosis for that. So that's a good resource to have. The case inclusion guide is also there in the same place under your adult cardiac surgery, where the training manual lives and everything. Just keep scrolling down. We'll briefly go over this, but it's not an all-inclusive list, okay? I'll just say that now. It does tell you what cases are required in conjunction with other surgery or standalone procedures. So if any CABG is required, valves, and look, you'll see all these valves that are required, any kind of valve procedure is required. Anything, any aorta procedure starting above that diaphragm, which includes dissections, are required. T-bars. If your CT surgeon participates in the T-bar, it is a required case to be entered. A lot of times you see the T-bars being done by both the vascular surgeon and the cardiac surgeon. If the cardiac surgeon's in there, involved in the procedure, participating in the procedure, that T-bar is required to be entered into the adult cardiac database. If your vascular surgeon's name is not on the participant list, then you will put the CT surgeon's name in the surgeon field on the data collection form. Oops, sorry. The other thing, I thought I had another page for that, but when you go through this case inclusion guideline, it will tell you exactly all the required cases. It will tell you optional cases. So, like, for example, standalone ECMO. That's an optional case. TAVRs. That's a really good, I get that question all the time. TAVRs live in the NCDR database. That's where they're required to go into. They are not required to be entered into the adult cardiac database. And they're optional, so you don't have to put your TAVRs into our database. Heart transplants is another one. It's required to go into the UNOS registry. It does not have to go into our registry. So this resource guide will tell you all of those things. And then, of course, if there's something in there that you're doing something that's not been addressed here, or you're not quite sure, you can send me an FAQ. Great vessels. That's another one. I get a lot of questions about procedures involving the great vessels. When I talk about great vessels, I'm talking about pulmonary artery, aorta, superior vena cava, inferior vena cava. Sorry, my voice is starting to get. There's a list in the training manual of all the great vessels, but yes, if you're having procedures done on great vessels by cardiac surgeons, those are required to go in. So this is a pretty good resource to help you to know what to put into the database and what you don't have to put into the database. Okay, so the I think this is the last resource in there, but we're going to go over it because it's really helpful. Is the NQF measures. And when you look at this document, I'll show you in a minute what it looks like, but it has process measures. So pre-op beta blocker therapy, IMA, your discharge antiplatelet, your beta blocker, your discharge antilipid. And then you've got your outcome measures, whether they be your renal failure metric or your surgical reexploration, prolonged vent. It's broken down into these two types of measures. The great thing about this that I like is it gives you the title. Okay, so here's my measure or metric, whatever you want to call it. Here's my description. That's who's in it. Okay. Here's my numerator. Here's my exclusions. I love the exclusions because you can tell exactly what, so like here it says version 4.2. This is anti-lipidic discharge. Cases are removed from the denominator if there is an in-hospital mortality. Well, that's pretty intuitive. Or if the patient has contraindicated mark, or if the patient goes to hospice, or if the patient left AMA. So it kind of just breaks it down really nice for you. So who's excluded from this metric, who's involved in the metric. It's a great little resource that I wanted to point out, and it's in that section where the training manual is, or the adult cardiac surgery database. You just keep scrolling down. How much time do I have left, Carol? I can't see a clock. Oh, she's probably gone. Let me look at my cell phone. Oh gosh. Okay, let's go. I think we're on track. It's 1:36. So we're gonna kind of switch gears a little bit now and talk about resources that are actually in IQVIA now, because I've kind of went through all the resources that I can think of that's in the STS website. So we're going to talk about some of these. I'm not going to get really detailed into IQVIA because we have all kinds of, like I said, Carol does a webinar once a quarter about reading the reports and looking at your DQR and all that stuff. I'm going to just do some high level stuff and introduce you to where things are. Okay, so I think that the analysis overview, the national report analysis overview that is in IQVIA is an excellent resource. It talks about the overview of the report, the reporting levels, your regions, your risk-adjusted results. How do you read it? How do you know how to handle missing data, how to do this star ratings? You get all kinds of good information in this resource. So if you don't have it, I have downloaded it and I have it I keep it on my desktop, so I have it at hand because I use it all the time. I'm just going to point out a few important things that are in there. So it's important to understand how missing data values are handled when the STS risk adjustment models are applied to patients with incomplete data. So and here's a good example of why it's important to understand, because, for example, if you have an EF that's missing, then the model's going to put something in, okay? Because we're talking risk adjustment. So the model's going to put something in. So if you're a male and your heart failure timing is chronic, you get an EF of 55. If you are a female and your heart time is chronic, you get an EF of 58. If it's acute in your male, you get 40. If it's acute in your female, you get 45. So it also says here, or less than 10%. It used to compute, and it still will. If you enter an EF of less than 10%, it's going to give you one of these defaults down here. Now, I know you don't want that to happen. So in the training manual, June 2021, you will see that we have a clear note that if your EF is less than 10, please enter 10. Please enter 10. Because if you enter 8, this model is going to give you an EF of 40. And I think you'd rather have an EF of 10 in your risk model than 40. Okay, so it's important to understand what happens when things are missing that are part of the risk variables. And this resource will tell you that. So I did want to point that out. It will tell you what it does to things. Okay. It also talks in this analysis report a little bit about odds ratios and risk adjusted rates and OE ratios. And I, like I said, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because I want to have some time for questions, but you can see in your report, you're going to see OR, that's your odds ratio. OE is your ODE ratio, observed versus expected. That's what that means. And here's your risk adjusted rate. Here's your STS view event. Oh, sorry. Excuse me.
Okay, we're all part of STS here. Family dogs too.
Sorry, my husband's trying to get her. Sorry about that. Okay. So anyway, where was I? Can't remember where I'm at, but okay. So I'm going to. Why do we give OEs and ORs? Well, I think it's because surgeons like to see both. Some surgeons are more comfortable using OR, some are more comfortable using OE. So we provide both of them. They're fairly similar, but I think it's mainly for surgeon comfort. Okay. Oops, I gotta get my screen to go down. I'm going to give you the really simplified down and dirty version of how to read this. So if your OE ratio is greater than 1, then the participant had an observed outcome level that was greater than expected. Basically, you performed worse than expected. So if your OE is greater than 1, you're not doing as good as you should be doing. If your OE is less than 1, you're doing better than expected. And if your OE is 1, that's to be expected. Okay, so this is really, really simplified, but you can quickly look at this and see if you're looking at a metric and you're looking at something that's been put out and you see that your OE ratio is 1.6. Whoa, I might need to work on that. But if you look and it's 0.8, oh yeah, I'm doing good because I'm less than 1. It's just a quick way to kind of easily look at it. I'm not a statistician. I will never profess to be one. So that's the only way I can explain it. Okay. A risk adjusted rate interpretation. This is another really down and dirty way too. So if your risk adjusted rate is greater than the STS rate, because STS is always like 1, right? Okay. It's always going to be as expected. That's the normal, the average. If your risk adjusted rate is greater than them, well, your outcomes are worse. If it's less than STS, your outcomes are better. So it's just a very simplified way to look at it and understand it and quickly identify areas of improvement. When you go into IQVIA, and again, I'm not going to talk much on this, but just a few things. Quality ratings, that's your star ratings and your scores. Quality rating details, basically drill down details on these ratings. Here you've got your star rating trends under here. NQF, these are your NQF measures, and these are the process and outcome measures as they've been reported. We talked about that in the NQF document. Star rating, gosh, we could have a whole hour on star rating, but I'm going to give you the down and dirty version. Star rating is based on the performance of all the other participants. So like if everybody else is got 100% IMA use, but you only have 99.8, you're not going to get a 3 because everybody else is at 100. Okay. So I get questions sometimes like, well, it's 99.6. Why am I not getting a 3 stars? Well, it's because everybody else is higher than that. So that's a really simplified version. But in the analysis overview that I was talking about, it talks about star rating and things of that nature, and how things are calculated with much greater detail than I just went over. But just remember that it's not just what you do that affects your star rating. It's what everybody else is doing that really affects your star rating. Because if everybody else is doing way better than you, then you're not going to get, you're not going to be in that 3-star category, even if you think you should be. So 3-star means that your performance is higher than STS mean. 2 is not statistically different from the mean, and 1, you're lower than the STS mean. The important thing I want to talk about star ratings is data completeness, because data completeness can affect whether you even get a star rating. So when you look at that analysis overview that we were talking about, it talks about participants were excluded from the analysis if they had fewer than 10 isolated CABG procedures in the patient population, and if they had more than 5% missing data on any of the following 5 NQF endorsed process measures. So IMA, pre-op beta blocker, discharge beta blocker, discharge antiplatelet, discharge antiplatelet. So that's one threshold, is this 5% missing on your process measures. So you want to make sure that that data is complete, because that could put you at risk for not having a star rating. The other thing that can put you at risk for not having a star rating is your mortality fields. Now, I want to point out that a value of unknown. So like if go to that field and there's a yes, no, unknown answer, whether this is an operative mortality. If you answer that field as unknown, it's going to count as missing. Okay. So I tell people never put unknown in that field. I never put that. I just suggest that to people. Don't even put it in there, because when you run your DQR, your data quality report, and you look at your missing data, if you've answered it as unknown, it's not going to show up as missing. But if you leave it blank, then when you run your DQR, it's going to show up as, oh, this mortality field is blank. I better go figure out why it's blank and find an answer to it. So I always say don't ever put unknown in there. Now, you will notice that if the percent missing is higher than 2% for any year after 2017, you're at risk of not receiving a star. So, and it's 2% per year. So if you have missing mortalities or unknown, because that counts as missing, for 2022, and it's 2.2% missing, that's above 2, you're at risk for not getting a star. Okay. And since it's a 3-year period now, when you look at 2021, the same thing. It's got to be less than 2 for that year. And for the year before that, 2020, it's got to be less than 3. So it's all the years involved in the star rating, and each year has to be less than 2%. In addition, the same thing for your NQF endorsed measures. So please keep that in mind. That's very important because people are really upset when they don't get a star rating, and their administrators are really upset when they don't get a star rating. Okay. This is just kind of how it looks. I'm not going to go, because I'm running out of time, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but you can see your overall rating, your score, the confidence intervals, and what percentile that you're in there. This is another, I think, pretty good breakdown. It goes over any mortalities, the count that you had, your failures, and you'll be able to drill down on this and see why you were falling out. More star ratings just kind of give you an idea what they looked like. Here's your NQF measures. Again, we talked about where to find the resources for what's in those in the STS website. The other resources, IQVIA has a library also, and they also have, oh look, they've got the multiplier tables there, and they've got other different types of resources here that you might find important and useful to your role. And I said, Carol does a really good job on going through the IQVIA. She's done a lot of presentations on that over the years. Just a couple housekeeping tips, and then we can take questions. So I tell people to keep your data collection forms, if you even have one, or your notes, whatever you use, for at least 3 years. I know the audits are pretty caught up. There was a time when audits were a little bit behind, but I think we're, I don't know where we're at, what year we're audited, but I think we're only 1 year behind now. But I still say 3 years just to be on the safe side. You want to make sure that you got a log of your 30-day mortality, 30-day readmission, and 30-day infection information in the event of an audit. It doesn't have to be a fancy log. It's basically however you want to keep your books, whether you want to have an Excel spreadsheet that says you've got the name of the patient, date of the surgery, and yes, he's alive on day 31, and I verified it here, or he wasn't readmitted and I verified it here, and he didn't have an infection and I verified it here. It could be as simple as that. I used to have data collection forms, and I stapled proof of life and stuff on it and kept it that way. So, however, it just has to be presentable to the auditors. So when you're thinking of a method to keep this log, think of a way that you could get it to the auditors easily. Probably my old-fashioned way that I just described would not be a very good way to do it. Although in the older days, the auditors would come to the hospital, which was really kind of a neat experience. So you got to hang out with them and help them find things and stuff like that. So it's pretty cool. Anyway, I think that's it. My voice is about gone. I'll go over some contact information really quickly, and we'll take questions. Ask a clinical question. If it's clinical, or you think that I know the answer to it, send it to me first. Carol's like super busy these days, especially with Donna retiring. So start with me first. If I can't answer it, I will send you on to Carol or Jane or whoever else I think could answer your question, the help desk or what have you. If you know it's the help desk, go to them first, okay? It's IQVIA questions, go to them first. Anyway, I want to thank you for listening. I know it was fast. I know it was a lot of information, but hopefully you've learned a few new tips here, something that would be helpful for you. Okay. All righty. Let's see. We have some questions. My voice is about to go. So let's see. Oh, got some hands clapping. That's sweet. Thank you. Okay. Let's see if I can answer some of these questions. Ooh. All right. Didn't there used to be a surgeon packet to fill out, not just individual worksheets? I think in the beginning, Ashley, we only had one worksheet. And as we've evolved, especially with the aorta procedures, we ask for we added more and more worksheets to help with different kinds of procedures. I hope that answers your question. Can we make our own worksheets? Yes, you can make your own worksheets. That's perfectly fine. Whatever works for you. Will there be a presentation on the Proc ID in the future? I think that would be a good presentation. Yes, Grace. I think it's a great idea. Okay. For risk model, is it only those races specified that are in the risk? It's only the ones that are specified, Diane. The ones that are in the risk model. Let's see. Can't remember if we go back up there and see which ones they were. I know Hispanic was in there. Yeah, and you can see here that, the Black race is in all of them. The Asian race is only in some, and Native Americans in some, Pacific American. I don't know why it's like that, but yes, those are the races that are in there in the risk model. Amanda, how does the insurance field work when the hospital is Canadian? What do current Canadian sites do for this? We are new and haven't started data collection. Oh, Canadian. So, yeah, I don't know. You don't have, I wonder, that's a really good question, Amanda. Do you know how to send yes, I just taught you how to send an email to me in the FAQ mailbox. Can you send me your name and all that stuff so I know? I want to talk to leadership about this. That's a really, really good point. Thank you. All right, Grace. So the Proc ID table you showed us helps determine categorizing the procedure if other procedures have been done right. Yes, right. That's correct. So if you just have a cabbage and there's nothing else done, well, it's going to be an isolated cabbage because you didn't do anything else. But when you do something else with a cabbage, that Proc ID chart will help you determine if what you did in conjunction with that cabbage is going to remove it from isolation or keep it in isolation. So that's a really good point, Grace. Pamela says, what about mitral clips? I'm assuming you're asking about inclusion, and no, they're optional to enter. Any of the things that you put in the TBT registry are optional to enter in the STS registry because, like I said, there's a place for them. They got their own little home over there in the NCDR registry. They don't have to be here too. Okay. One of your slides showed AVR plus MVR as analyzed procedure, but I thought this was in the other category and not analyzed. Well, Lynn, I wonder if I know what you're talking about. I think that we have a Proc ID for it, but I don't think it's analyzed yet, but don't quote me on that. But I think I know what you're talking about, if that answers your question. So we do have a Proc ID for it. Oh, Diane says I was wonderful. Thank you, Diane. Thank you. Great presentation, Mary. Okay, let's see. I have the same login problems as I have sent multiple. Is there a direct number to call? Is this a login for STS or IQVIA? Let me, what's that person? 11774. If it's a login, either way, can send me this information in the FAQ mailbox so I can personally get you to the right person you need to get your questions answered.
I think, Melinda, this is Carol. I think people are trying to use their same login for the IQVIA website and the STS website. And
they can't do that. You can't do
no,
that.
they're not the same login.
That's the problem. Yeah. So let me show them that really quick. I thought you
Yeah.
were gone, Carol.
No, I came back. I came back.
You were gone because one time I said Carol and you weren't there. Okay. So this adult cardiac surgery database here, this is where you use your STS login. Okay. The one STS gave you. Now, that's under adult cardiac surgery database. Again, this is where you use your STS login. This one over here that confuses me, but I'm easily confused, is this one. Like when you first open up the resources for data managers, it says tips, training, and key deadlines for data abstraction. Well, this access button right here takes you right to IQVIA. So it's a little deceptive in my mind because it doesn't take you to where I think it should, but it takes you to IQVIA instead. This you have to have an IQVIA sign in for this part, as opposed to the other part that's under the adult cardiac surgery database. This is your STS login. Maybe that's what that person was talking about. I have struggles with the STS portal login with new site on Chrome. Can use it on Edge just fine. Not sure. You know, sometimes I have problems. And I use Chrome. I use it in Chrome all the time. I have problems too because it'll say you've been directed to the site too many times or something, and it won't let me get in. I have to run a crack cleaner and all this other kind of stuff to figure out how to get back in. So the STS login is the same one you need to be able to register for AQO, in case that helps. That helps. Yes, that is the same login. Mary says, I made the same mistake regarding clicking the access data site. Yeah, it's a little deceptive. You know, Carol, we need to get it renamed.
Yeah, I know. I did the same thing multiple times. And I'm like, wait, hold on. This is IQVIA. Yeah, I'll work with marketing on that.
All right. I think there's no other questions. I appreciate everybody listening. I know it's a ton of information, so hopefully it will help. This will be recorded. It will be on the website. And the one from last year I did, it's still there. And I listened to it just the other day to help refresh myself. And it's really good too. And I actually got through a few more things. I guess I talked a little slower on this one. So anyway, thank you very much. Thank you, Carol, and for being here and supporting me through this. All right, everybody, we'll talk later. Have a great rest of your day.